Okay, yeah, so reflecting on your spirituality, good. Let's take one more maybe from the sisters, if you're alive. Like when you hear the word Tazkiyah, does it mean anything to you? Do you think of something automatically? Yes, in the back. Purification, absolutely, yeah. So purification is a big one. I thought that was going to be mentioned first, actually, is when you think of the word Tazkiyah, a lot of times people think of the word purification, you think of the heart, you think of spirituality. All of these things are true. All of these things are related to what Tazkiyah is, but for the purposes of tonight, just to make things very, very, very simple, and make it so that, you know, when you leave this session, inshallah, and you just start to think about how you can work on some things practically, you go back to a very simple definition. And this is not an academic definition. This is not one you will probably find in any books or anything like that, or from scholars or something like that. But it's something that's very practical in terms of how we actually apply Tazkiyah in our life. And that is that Tazkiyah, very simply put, is about, it's a process of bringing the heart closer to Allah by doing two things, okay? It's a process of bringing the heart closer to Allah by doing two things. Number one is removing anything negative from the heart, okay? So any of the negative traits that you can think of, anything that will pull you away from Allah, by removing those things, you're getting closer to Allah. So that's one way that you actually bring your heart closer to Allah, is by removing the bad. The other way, pretty obvious, is the opposite of that, is by adding more good to the heart. So increasing in the things that will bring your heart closer to Allah, increasing in the good qualities of the heart. By doing these two things together, removing the bad and increasing the good within your heart, you automatically bring your heart closer to Allah. So that's really as simple as it is. So don't turn this into something that's very complicated and make it something that's so hard to reach, and you have to be at a certain level to even start thinking about Tazkiyah, and like, oh my God, I have so many shortcomings and I don't know the basics, and how am I supposed to do this? Don't let that set you behind, right? It's a very simple concept, and it's a foundational concept in our deen and in our connection with Allah, and how we're supposed to live our daily life, is that it just, is something, it's a journey that we take, it's a process that we take of removing the bad and bringing in more good. So the question then becomes, why is there a focus on the heart? Why is it that, in this discussion, we find that there's so much emphasis on the heart and improving the heart and bringing the heart closer to Allah, and not the brain, or not the mind, or not even the body? Why is it that the heart is emphasized here? And this comes from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that I think many of us are familiar with, and maybe you've heard it in different ways, or referenced in different ways, where the Prophet ﷺ, it's a longer hadith, but the end of the hadith is which the Prophet ﷺ, he says that Ala wa inna fil jasadi mudgha, that inside of the body there is this lump of flesh. And notice how the Prophet ﷺ explains this concept, right? Very simply put. It says inside of the body there's a lump of flesh. إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّ. If that lump of flesh is good, then everything else is good. Everything else gets taken care of by default, automatically. It's handled, it's good. وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّ. But if that thing is corrupt, if that thing is bad, if that thing is filled with negative traits, then everything else becomes corrupt. Everything else becomes bad. And the Prophet ﷺ, he closes by saying, Ala wa hiya al-qalb, that lump of flesh is the heart. Is the heart. So in our religion, in our deen, and in our relationship with Allah, it is the most important aspect of our life, and the most important aspect of our journey towards Allah is refinement of the heart. Can you go to the next one? So this is really, the heart has control over everything else, right? The heart controls all of the other limbs. The example that one of my teachers had given me was that you can imagine the heart as being like a router, right? Like a Wi-Fi router. That if the router itself is not connected to Wi-Fi, if it doesn't have a strong connection, if it's not receiving the signals, then all of the other devices that are trying to connect to it would not be able to do so, right? and then you'd have, you would struggle because now your devices are not connected to Wi-Fi, and everything else that relies on that router would lose that connection because the router itself doesn't have a connection. And likewise, if the router is receiving signals from the Wi-Fi and it's connected and everything is strong, then all the devices that connect to it will also be strong and it'll be fine. Right? So the same example applies towards the heart. The heart is the controller over everything else in our life. If your heart is getting signals from Allah, if your heart is connected towards Allah, if you're getting those signals from God, then everything else will start to fall into place. You won't need to work as hard. You won't find yourself struggling as much because your heart is in the right spot. Right? But at the same time, on the other hand, if you don't focus on the heart, then now everything else will start to really fall apart. And that's where sometimes people, they focus on some of the symptoms, and that's why this discussion is so important, is that people, they focus on a lot of the symptoms, right? Like you can see very clearly that maybe somebody has an arrogance problem, or they have an anger problem, or they lack gratitude, or they have pride, or something like that. And you focus on just those certain qualities, and you think that that'll solve the entire problem. But in reality, what you're missing is that it's not just those few symptoms. It's not just the few things that you're struggling with or the things that you're not able to do well. It's actually the fact that your heart has some cleansing that it needs. It needs some purification. It needs to be realigned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why this discussion is so important. And I just wanted to start with just defining it so everyone's on the same page. Now, from here, I want to focus on 3 specific areas of Tazkiyah. And this is hopefully where I can get some interaction, inshallah. And I also want to leave some time at the end in case people have questions or comments, really. The 3 things that I want to focus on is, number 1, what is the individual impact of Tazkiyah, right? Like, what's in it for you? That's what really everybody cares about. At the end of the day, that's what you're most concerned with. All of us are most concerned with that, is what's in it for me? How is this going to impact me in my life? How is this going to impact me in the long run? So I want to focus on what's the individual impact. Then, taking from that, what then becomes the societal impact of focusing on Tazkiyah? And how does it actually change the entire world around you? Because most of the time when people think about Tazkiyah, they think it's just about the self and it's about you on your own and your personal connection with Allah, and it is. But your personal connection with Allah has an impact on the world around you. You are more powerful than you believe. Your connection with Allah is more powerful than you think. It's extremely important. And then lastly, we'll end with just some practical steps that we can take so that if you ignored everything that we talked about for the first 20 minutes, then inshallah, when you walk out the door, you can at least have 2 or 3 things that you know what to do when you get out of here. So can you go to one more after this? Yes, okay. So the first thing, remember, we're talking about individual impact, is that the heart becomes connected and aligned with everything that Allah wants. Okay, it becomes completely connected towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to a point where now your love for Allah and your love for Islam and what our religion teaches is so strong that nothing in this life can impact you. Okay, it's like a superpower. It's so incredibly beautiful how when you have a strong, very strong relationship with Allah, now all of a sudden when you face the wear and tear of the dunya, when you face the wear and tear of life, when you face difficulty in life, when you face tragedies in your life, things that set you back, negative things that happen to you, you're able to get through that a lot stronger because your heart is now superpowered by Allah. Right? Your willpower is now powered by Allah and that connection to God. And that's something so incredibly beautiful, because how many times do we find ourselves that when we put our connections too much in people at the expense of our connection with God, we find disappointment, right? There is some advice that I got a long time ago, is that like when you put your trust in people, you will always be disappointed. But when you put your trust in Allah, you'll never be disappointed. You'll never find disappointment in that. Like people will always find a way, even those that are closest to you, by the way, the ones that your best friends, the ones that you're so close to, the ones that you feel like you can never live without. Most of the time, yes, they'll have a really positive impact on you, but even they will sometimes disappoint you. Even they will sometimes cause you harm. Even they will sometimes cause pain. And sometimes you'll be the cause of that for others, even unintentionally. So when you have this strong connection to Allah, it now becomes something that you gain happiness and satisfaction in life through your reliance on Allah. All right, you have that super strong connection with Allah, so now everything starts to fall into place. Okay, so that's the first one. The second thing, and this one I think is really interesting to put into perspective, because so many times we find that people, when they're trying to get closer to Allah, they say to themselves something along the lines, and maybe you've struggled with this personally, or maybe somebody has vented to you about this in the past, that I do a few good things, I get really motivated I get like these these bursts of motivation, and then all of a sudden things just go back to the way they were, and I start to go back to the same mistakes. I start to avoid doing the same good things that I used to be doing before, and it's just this endless cycle. Why does that happen? Why do I keep on falling into that? And the real benefit that Tazkiyah brings is, you can go to the next one, is that it actually begins to now make the path easier for you. That all of a sudden you're going to find it that doing good becomes easier. It becomes more simple. It becomes more natural to you. And doing bad or doing things that pull you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now all of a sudden become very difficult. They become very hard on you. A very basic example of this is eating healthy. Okay? If any of you have ever tried to do like a diet or a strict regimen for dieting or for working out or for trying to get into shape or whatever, just trying to live a more healthy lifestyle, and you are coming from somewhere where you didn't have that lifestyle before, the beginning is very difficult. If you're coming from the life of like French fries and cheeseburgers all the time, that salad that you have for the first time tastes terrible. It's horrible. It's like eating grass. It's really, really difficult to do. But if you power through that beginning, right? And if any of you have really stuck to it before, and may Allah give you strength, because it's very difficult to do that. But if any of you really power through and you stick to that diet, that regimen, that workout plan, then all of a sudden you find that now it's not even that it becomes easier, you start to enjoy it. Right? Like the healthy foods actually start to taste better. Right? The unhealthy foods start to taste worse. You no longer have like even that desire to try to eat the unhealthy foods, because now all of a sudden your body has realigned itself with what's natural, right? Is actually being healthy, being fit, being in a good, being in good shape. When your body starts to align in that way, now all of a sudden the things that were really pulling you towards junk food and sugar and all these things, now that really starts to lessen. And you find it that it becomes so easy for you to navigate this path. So the same thing applies for Tazkiyah, that as you work on your heart more, as you try to improve your spirituality, then all of a sudden you're going to start to find it easier to wake up for Fajr. Like you struggled with it your entire life, but then all of a sudden it's really easy. You're waking up before your alarm goes off. And you're shocked. You're almost like surprised with yourself that you even got to that point. All of a sudden you find it very easy to avoid backbiting, right? You just don't have that desire anymore. When you're surrounded by people that start backbiting, you react to it like it's a disgusting smell. Like it just stands out to you. You just feel a weird feeling when you're around them. And so on and so forth. All of the good becomes a lot easier, and all of the bad now all of a sudden looks very unattractive to you. So this is the benefit of really dialing in and focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so these are two individual benefits that I wanted to cover. Now I want to switch over to some of the societal impacts, and this is actually really important, because again, when we talk about Tazkiyah, most of the time the conversation is dedicated towards the individual, and it should be, because like we discussed everything so far, it is very intimate to who you are and your connection with Allah. It is very personal by nature. But at the same time, a society is just made up of a bunch of individuals, right? Like a society is nothing different than just a bunch of people mixed together. So if all of the individuals now start to have this emphasis on tazkiyah and upon growing and getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's going to have impacts on society, right? So the first thing is, can you go one more, or actually two more from here? Yeah. The first thing that you'll notice as a societal impact, when people start to focus on tazkiyah, is that you will see like an undeniable improvement in society in all aspects of that society. If people really focused on tazkiyah, if people really focused on their connection with Allah, they really focused on their heart, and they really focused on that purification, removing the bad and adding more good. If people did that in society, you would see an undeniable improvement in everything. And the best example of this is the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Look at what life was like in Mecca and in Arabia before the Prophet ﷺ arrived and after he arrived. Look at the difference, right? Arguably, that nation was on the brink of collapse, right? That nation was filled with, all of the worst possible vices that you could think of. There was murdering happened, there was fighting between tribes, there was disunity, there was gambling, there was intoxication, there was burying of daughters alive, there was some crazy things happening in that society, and that was the norm. That was the norm. But all of a sudden, when the Prophet ﷺ arrives and he brings Islam to these people, just in the span of 23 short years, most of the people in this room are very close to that age, right? And like, that's not a very, very long period of time to create such a massive change that you see in the seerah. Just within a short period of 23 years, now everything changed. For a stranger who maybe was in Mecca before the Prophet ﷺ arrived, and then let's say he isolated himself for many, many years, for those 23 years, and then now all of a sudden he comes back, he would think that it's completely two different places. Like, it's not even the same place because of the changes that happened. They began to grow economically. They made incredible strides. The Muslim community and the Arabian Peninsula was thriving actually in an economic sense because of what Islam brought to them. It started to thrive in a spiritual sense because of what Islam brought to them. Their empire itself, the control that they had, the reach that they had, grew tremendously over several years, right? Because of the impact that the seerah had. And at the heart of what the Prophet ﷺ brought was this, emphasis on tazkiyah, was this emphasis on purification of the heart. That's why you find this so heavily emphasized with the companions and with the stories, that they really, really focused on this. This is what they lived by. They internalized this. And so that's really what you start to see in society. So don't actually just limit tazkiyah to just yourself, because by improving your personal tazkiyah and trying to suggest and encourage others to follow that lifestyle, you're actually going to create massive change in society. You will save society from itself, right? You will save society from itself, from all of the issues that you can see, and there are tons. When we look around and we view the society that we live in, there are tons of issues, and you guys know about those better than me. I don't have to go into details, but the solution to that really is this internal tazkiyah that we need to have. Okay. Then the second thing that I'll mention, and then the last part will be practical, so I think that'll be more lively, inshallah. Actually, I'll start to ask you guys before I share my thoughts. Sorry, I made a bunch of generic pictures, and now I'm forgetting why I put the pictures there. So this one makes sense though, or it will in a moment, inshallah. The second thing that this does on a societal level that's really, really important, again, this emphasis on Tazkiyah, is it helps us control our desires by bringing God into a godless society. Okay, and this one is really, really deep, and this one needs a little bit of attention to unpack, because there's a lot that relates to this idea. Is that, first of all, we have to understand that our religion is balanced. Okay, that is the foundational concept in our deen, is that we are balanced people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, that this, no doubt we have made you, just as a result of this, we made you a balanced nation, a balanced people. So we are balanced in our deen. And so when we have this balance, part of that balance means that we are given authority over our desires so long as they don't conflict with divine revelation or with divine decrees, right? So I'll give you a very simple example of this, because we live in a world where everyone is really, focused on their own desires, and they say like, I should be in charge, and I have the authority, and I can do as I want, and I should have the ability to, do whatever I want, and nobody should be enforcing anything on me. And this concept is true to an extent within Islam, only until, again, the point where it starts to now conflict with what Allah has decreed, with what Allah and the Prophet ﷺ has sent down. So a very simple example of this is anger. Right? If somebody were to say that their personality, and I know when I say anger, sometimes people think, well, that's not really a desire, but actually, if you think about it, it is. Right? Anger is a desire, because you are losing control of your emotion, and you're giving into the desire to show that anger towards the people around you for whatever reason it is. Right? So anger itself, expressing that anger, is a desire. And somebody could say that, yeah, I have, control over my desires, and I should be able to do what I want with my desires. But what we find with the Prophet ﷺ is an example exactly like this, where a companion came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, give me some advice. He said, Awsini, give me some advice. And the Prophet ﷺ said to him, La taghdab, don't become angry. And then the man was like, no, but really, give me some advice. And the Prophet ﷺ said, La taghdab, don't get angry. And the man continued to ask, because he was expecting something like, really mind-blowing and really oh my God, I never thought about that. But it was very simple. The Prophet ﷺ wasn't there to impress people. He was there to teach, and he was there to refine hearts. So he said, don't get angry, right? So this is a very simple example of our anger, being an example of a desire, and it needs to be put in check by what Allah wants, what Allah has sent down. So although we have this desire to, show our anger, we have other desires that pull us towards things in life, we can do those things only until it starts to have a conflict with Allah. And when we do that, now all of society starts to thrive on that, right? Again, going back to that same first point, is now everyone starts to operate with Allah in mind. Everyone starts to operate with God. And now everything that you witness is through the lens of Allah. It doesn't matter how you feel all the time, because now your feelings are validated not by other people, or not even actually by yourself, but they're validated by Allah. And that's a really beautiful thing, right? That's something that, again, our religion is very balanced. It doesn't mandate that we curb all of our desires, that we remove everything, and that we live a life, of complete boredom without any desires. Nowhere does our deen ask us to do that, but it asks us to just have that balance in how we do it. Okay. So let me pause here for a second and open the floor. For now, I want, this was a lot of really cool, thought-provoking things about what does Tazkiyah do, but now the real thing that matters here, and that's important, is about what do we do practically, right? So I have 3 examples of things that we can do practically, but I want to start by asking, what are some things that you guys feel are practical in getting somebody started with Tazkiyah? If you were meeting a stranger and they said, listen, I want to focus on refining my heart, what do I do? What's my first step? What would you say? Yeah. Okay, stick to your 5 daily prayers. This is a really good example because it highlights something that is a regular occurrence within our life that will bring us back to Allah. And that's beautiful, right? This is a really practical way to now start on this journey. And 5 daily prayers is a beautiful example of it, but we can generalize that even further, is that one thing that we can do is build something small and consistent into every single day. Okay? That's one thing. Perfect. Okay, yeah.
Good intention.
Good intentions. Okay, yeah. This is also really important that when you do tazkiyah with the wrong intentions, then that's actually a recipe for disaster, right? Because then you're focused on entirely the outer, right? Your intention is to appear as being somebody who's like really has like high levels of tazkiyah. You want to be the person that everyone looks at and they're like, he's got good tazkiyah, or she knows what she's doing, and that's what your real desire is, and that in itself is a desire, right? So that's a recipe for disaster. So yes, absolutely, is before you embark on this journey, is make sure you refine the intention and make it something only for Allah. Absolutely. Let's take 2 more, and then I'll give a couple also. Yeah.
Daily dhikr.
Daily dhikr. Okay, so that kind of relates to the first point that was brought up of having something scheduled in your life on a daily basis, something even small that can improve whatever it is that you're trying to work towards. So dhikr is an example, and salah is an example. Yeah.
Putting your trust in Allah.
Putting your trust in Allah. Yeah, so this is huge, right? Because, again, you might feel like you have control over your tazkiyah even, right? Like you might have this false sense of control where you're like, okay, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to run with it, and I'm going to become somebody that really focuses on tazkiyah, and it's on me, and I have the power to do that. And that's really great because confidence is something that Islam promotes, but at the same time, you have to level that with, I'll do it if Allah allows me to. I'll do it with Allah's blessing. I'll do it because Allah has enabled me to be able to get to this point, right? And that's something that happens before you start on the journey of tazkiyah, and actually throughout, and especially afterwards, that when you reach a certain level, let's say, for example, let's go back to the prayers. If you are really struggling in your prayers, and you really want to start to improve on your prayers, then now all of a sudden you start to pray and you find that you're praying 5 times a day, you worked on it really hard for several weeks or months. You reflect on that and you say that actually I got to this point only because Allah allowed me to, not because of my efforts, right? Allah allowed me to have those efforts that got me to this point. So yeah, that's huge. Okay, so I'll mention just 2 more that I think are really crucial for tazkiyah, and then we'll wrap up. I think we're getting close on time. So I'll wrap up with just 2 more, and then the conclusion, inshallah, is, first of all, good company is incredibly important. Okay, good company is a necessary piece to tazkiyah, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Al-rijalu ala dini khalili," that a man or a person is on the religion of their friend. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Therefore, all of you be very careful about who you choose for friends." Right? If you surround yourselves with people that are, really invested in trying to get closer to Allah, if you surround yourself with people that are trying to improve in their tazkiyah, that's going to make the journey so much easier, right? And that's true for everything in life. That's why every single one of you try to reach out to your friends to make sure you're taking the same classes as them. And that way you're not alone in class. That's why you do that. You do that because it becomes so much easier to get through that class when you have somebody else that can help you, and that you can rely on. So this is incredibly important to have good friends, and this helps to bring consistency. And the last thing that I'll mention before we conclude is gaining knowledge is incredibly important here, right? You have to build within your life something where you are gaining Islamic knowledge on a regular basis, because this will help you to refine your tazkiyah, right? This will help you, and it'll also help you to maximize your return on investment with tazkiyah, because you will know the things that draw you really close to Allah, like will help you leap forward in your connection to Allah, and you'll know the things that are just small steps towards Allah. All of that is important, but you need to know the difference between them, because sometimes, in your daily life you build the steps, but then eventually you'll need something that really leaps you forward and draws you closer to Allah. You'll need that every now and then. And the only way you understand the difference between those things is if you increase in your knowledge. So this is incredibly important, right? To increase in your knowledge and make sure that you're doing it on a consistent basis. If you go through an entire semester, and here's the check, okay? This is something practical for all of us. If you go through an entire semester and you realize that at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, you have the same amount of Islamic knowledge, something's wrong, right? Because you spend all these hours in your classes and you spend all these hours learning about secular things, and that's extremely important, and our religion emphasizes that as well. But if you're not scheduling time for something even very simple, very basic, right? You don't have to make it something very complicated. You don't have to make it something that is very rigorous. It can be very basic and it can be very simple, but something that increases in your knowledge, so that you can look back at the end of your semester and just say, yeah, like I learned this over the semester, I gained this Islamic knowledge. Okay, so to conclude, we talked about quite a few things. We defined Tazkiyah, we talked about the individual impact that Tazkiyah has, that it aligns the heart with Allah, that it makes the path to good easier. We talked about the collective or the societal impact that Tazkiyah has and how it reforms society overall. But the two things that I'll leave you guys with is that, and these were kind of mentioned in brief, but that's extremely important as you as we go on this journey, is number one, remember that Tazkiyah is a gradual process. Okay, it is a gradual process, that you're not gonna go to bed tonight and then wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden you feel like extremely connected to Allah if you haven't been feeling that in years. Okay, it's gonna take time, right? It's gonna take effort. It's gonna become something gradual, but it's just something that you need to build regularly every day. Again, going back to the point that the points that were raised before about your daily prayers and your dhikr, is that this needs to be something consistent, something that you build regularly throughout your life, so that gradually over time you're improving. Will you have setbacks? Absolutely. But what's really important is if you were to graph your Tazkiyah over several years, it's an upward trend generally, right? You might have dips here and there, but generally speaking, it's an incline. It's going upward and you're improving. So remember that it's a gradual process. And the last thing, very, very important, is don't become pessimistic. Okay, something that happens to people when they start to try to increase in their tazkiyah and they try to build on their relationship with Allah, is they all of a sudden become very pessimistic, because they start learning about all the things that they're not doing, that they should be doing. And they learn about all the things that they shouldn't be doing, that they're doing all the time. And then now all of a sudden that becomes very crushing for some people. The weight of that knowledge becomes very paralyzing, where now it turns into something where it's like, okay, well, I'm this far behind, why should I even care? Why should I even start? Or, I'm just gonna forget about it. So don't let this become something that, you're pessimistic about. The believer is optimistic. The believer relies on Allah, the believer has a connection with Allah and knows that Allah can change your heart at any moment. Allah can, change your situation at any moment. And so you just have to make sure that you're taking the gradual steps and that you're being consistent, and you don't allow that to become something that, pushes you away, that it has the opposite effect, right? Ultimately, the goal that we discussed in the beginning, the real purpose, is to bring ourselves closer to Allah just by adding more good and removing some of the bad. And if we do that, then it won't be something that makes us pessimistic. And this would also be something that allows you to go out and improve society with, right? As part of something where you're optimistic about is like, don't feel that in order to do tazkiyah, you need to just isolate yourself. Because the Prophet ﷺ was the best example of this, and he was out and about. He was interacting with people, he was leading the people, he was mixing with the people. And the Prophet ﷺ said that the person who mixes with the people and is down, kind of down with the masses, is better than the person that just isolates himself or herself, that just keeps themselves alone, right? So don't become pessimistic in this and make it something that you're just, doing it on your own and you have to isolate yourself. This needs to become something collective, and it needs to be something optimistic. So end this on a good note where no matter where you are in your journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it can be upward from here only until the day that you meet Him. And you'll be happy looking back on your life knowing that from this point onwards it was an upward slope, even though some of us may feel like we're in a really low spot right now. So with that I'll end, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to improve our connection with Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be people that gradually improve in our tazkiyah and keep this at the forefront of our minds and our hearts at all times. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. I don't know. Oh, sure. Yeah, so I guess questions or even comments or thoughts or reflections is good too. Nothing. Going once? Yes. Say that again?
What books would you recommend?
Books. Okay. So there are a lot, and it honestly just depends on what your situation is and what your relationship with reading is. If you consider yourself to, really want to dive into something, I would say at a basic level, something that's pretty foundational, but also very deep, and something that balances, I think, people at all levels, wherever you are in your journey, is The Beginning of Guidance, Imam Ghazali's book. That book, and I think there's definitely PDFs and you can buy it online for sure. That book covers the concepts related to Tazkiyah really well, and it's a comprehensive look. And like I said, it's good for people who are just starting out on their journey because it breaks it down into very easy to understand concepts. But it's also good for people that are further along in their journey because the depth in which he covers some of those topics is really, really vast. And so it becomes something that's very thought-provoking and you can implement. So that's one that I would recommend. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Why is going to R2R important?
Why is going on? I think that's a question for him probably, right?
From your experience.
So actually, okay, this is a shameless plug, but he didn't actually tell me that this was going to be a question for him. So what I'm saying is genuine, inshallah, is that truly, actually, in preparing for today, I'd say like maybe 40 to 50% of what I spoke about today came from the last R2R. So if you felt like whatever you heard today was new, it's probably because you weren't there last year, or maybe you were paying attention. But no, on that note, it is always, I've been going for several years now, and it's a really great experience. And again, the thing that I think is most beneficial about that is you're surrounded, sort of like this, but a higher level. You're surrounded with people that are moving towards the same goal as you, amongst people that are experts in the field. Like the speakers and the scholars that are brought are experts in that field, and the way that they can convey these concepts to you among other people that really have a thirst for that relationship with Allah, that connection with Allah, is something that you won't really find in a lot of places. So yes, it's absolutely important, and I know this is supposed to be like a primer or precursor to that, but that would be way more beneficial than anything that you heard today, and will hopefully get you to a point in your life much stronger than you are now. So absolutely go out to R2R and be there, inshallah. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have another question. So, you briefly mentioned like Tazkiyah, but like not for the right reasons, but you said like the performing of Tazkiyah with the wrong intention. So can you elaborate on like what that means and like how can you like clarify between like actually having Tazkiyah versus like performative Tazkiyah, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So So again, the foundation of this concept is a very basic hadith that I think most of us are familiar with, where the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, right? Actions are judged based on their intentions. And there's another hadith, actually a lengthy hadith, that I think answers this question very comprehensively, in which the Prophet ﷺ tells us that on the Day of Judgment, it's a very scary hadith actually. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that on the Day of Judgment, there will be 3 people that are brought in front of Allah for judgment, okay? And the first person, I won't go through all 3 examples, but I'll just give one example. The first person that's brought forward was somebody that was incredibly generous, okay? Very generous in the cause of Allah. They donated lots and lots of money. They were always at the forefront. Whenever there was a fundraiser, they were the ones that were raising their hands first. They were the ones that were giving money. They were the ones that were supporting every cause. You can ask them and ask them and ask them, and they would continue to give. This was the type of person that was there. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring him forward and will ask him, what did you do with the blessings that I gave you in life? And how do you think he responds? What do you think he says? Yeah.
He says he gave for the sake of Allah.
Yeah, he says exactly what he did. He says, I gave for your sake. Anytime there was a need for money, I was the first to give, and I was doing it solely for your sake, and I helped get all of these initiatives started because I supported it financially, and I donated to this thing and that thing, and he'll go on and on and on, and after he's done, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to him, Kadhabt, you have told a lie. And he'll say to him, you did it because you wanted the people to say that you were generous. You did it because you wanted the people to think that you were, really wealthy, but that you were very generous with your money. And so because of that, this person will be thrown into hellfire. And the other 2 examples are similar. There is the example of somebody who had extreme knowledge of Quran and they were very righteous in their knowledge and scholarly. And the other is of somebody who died in battle for the sake of Allah. All of these people will say to Allah that they did these things for His sake, but in reality, and apparently on the outside it seemed that way, but in reality it was actually something that was for the people. It was so that people could say that they were brave, that they were really knowledgeable, or that they were generous. And the Prophet ﷺ concludes this hadith by saying that these 3 people will be the first thrown into hellfire. Right, so let that sink for a second. And these 3 people will be the first thrown into hellfire. Not the person who didn't pray, not the person that was really struggling with, waking up for Fajr, or the one that, struggled while they were fasting or whatever, didn't read Quran. None of those people will be first. The first will be 3 people who did apparently good things, but for the wrong reasons. So actually Islam, a foundational concept of Islam is that it's better for us to, Islam would rather us not do something good for the wrong reasons if we can avoid it, right? So that's something that's really, really important, is that we always have to go back to our intention and make sure that we're doing things for the sake of Allah. And that's something nobody will ever know. That's what makes Tazkiyah so difficult, by the way, is nobody else will be able to tell you that, right? Everybody think for a moment of somebody generous in like your community, in your family, in your masjid or whatever. You have no idea if that person is being sincere or not, right? You have no idea. So in our life, it's pretty clear, and it just seems like you assume the best, and that's what you should do. You assume the best, and you think that they're sincere, and that's great. But that person knows, and Allah will make it known to that person on the Day of Judgment. So that's kind of the concept of doing Tazkiyah for the wrong reasons, is if your intentions are skewed and primarily you're doing it for the sake of the people. Any other questions? Yeah.
How can you achieve Tazkiyah or purity in a society where purity isn't really valued?
That's like a very existential, like deep question. No, it's a very good question though. How do you, for if people didn't hear it, the question was, how do you achieve Tazkiyah in a society where Tazkiyah is not really valued? First of all, it starts with the individual, right? Is like, you have to become comfortable doing things that other people will probably look at as being strange or not really valuable, right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, that Islam began as something strange and will end as something strange, so glad tidings to the strangers, right? Because by definition, yeah, the society that we live in will not value a lot of the things that are related to Tazkiyah, but it starts with an individual effort, and again, just honestly, a mental challenge above anything else to just own your relationship with Allah and really feel like that's the primary thing in your life. That it doesn't really matter what people think, because you're not looking for people to validate your feelings, you're looking for Allah to validate your feelings. And so when you do that, you start to build that internal confidence. That's the first step. Then consistency comes by spreading that to the people around you, starting with your friends and your family, right? That's what the Prophet ﷺ did. Who were the first people to accept Islam? First person was his wife, Khadija, right? It was because that was the person closest to him, that's his family. And then it spread. The first few people to accept after that were his closest friends. Abu Bakr was amongst the first, that's his best friend, right? So you start with the individual effort, then you spread that towards your family and your close friends, and then that begins like, a rippling effect across society at large, right? And that's where it starts to become more valued. And it's a long-term journey, and that's why I said like this is a gradual process. But really what it begins with is just that self-realization in the beginning, and knowing where you stand and trying to have that goal within yourself, and then sharing it with the people around you. Any other questions? These are really great questions, by the way. Yes.
How can you avoid getting discouraged on the path?
Okay. Question was how do you avoid discouragement on the path of Tazkiyah? This is a very important question, because when we say that this is a gradual process, and we say that this is something that you're going to be working on for the rest of your life, pretty much, you're going to face discouragement. You're going to face setbacks as you do it. So the way that you get through those is by, first of all, having clear goals in mind, right? So one of the practical things that I was going to mention that I didn't, because you guys were giving really great ones, was about the importance of self-reflection and accountability, which is that in order to know what to focus on, you just have to kind of sit with yourself, alone with your thoughts, and just think like, where do I truly stand in front of Allah right now? What is my current relationship with Allah? When you understand that, then that's what you use to build goals, right? Like for some of you, the goal is, I need to start praying again. I haven't prayed in weeks. I haven't prayed in months or years. So for some of you, the goal is to pray. For others in the room, you're praying all 5 prayers in the masjid. So that's not your goal. Your goal becomes something else entirely, right? So it all depends on where you are. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because if you have a solid and realistic and achievable goal in your mind, then even when you face setbacks on that journey, it'll be easier for you to get back on the path, because you're not just running aimlessly, right? You have something that you're working towards, and so the motivation to get back on the path is the end result itself that you're working towards. So that's very, very important to deal with setbacks. The other thing, not to belabor the point, but it is very important here, is the people that you keep around you. They are going to help you, weather the storm. They are going to help you deal with the setbacks, because the hope is that when you face a setback, hopefully not every single one of your friends also face that setback. Hopefully, if you're in a group of 5 people and you're struggling with your prayers, hopefully not all 5 of you are struggling with your prayers. Hopefully there's some of you that are at a stronger relationship with your prayers, and they will be able to help motivate you. They will be able to help, reel you back in, bring you back onto the path, and help you push forward. And at times you'll do that for them, right? That's the thing. It's never a one-sided relationship. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that the believer is a mirror to another believer, right? Like there's that relationship, that back and forth, that that give and take that you get from a true, beautiful relationship between friends that are founded on growing closer to Allah, right? So that's extremely important. So I would say those two things are kind of important when it comes to dealing with setbacks. Is having a really clear goal in mind that's realistic, and then also having people that are going to help you achieve that goal. And it's good actually to share those goals with those friends as well. That like buddy system, that idea of like, hey, these are some things that I'm working on. If you see me struggling with it, trying to help me with it, you know, that vulnerability is so important, right? That's something that we see that was present in the lives of the companions and with the Prophet ﷺ, that they lived like this, right? They had that level of vulnerability with the people around them. So those are two things that I think are kind of important. I hope that answers the question. Anything else? Other questions? Alright, I guess that's good, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan again, guys. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to act on what was heard. If I bored you, I apologize. If anything was good, then that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If anything was wrong or incorrect, that's from my shortcomings and from the shaitan. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Yeah, Jazakallah Musa for that amazing talk. Hopefully that gave some more context as to what Tazkiyah is and kind of what we do at Road to Revival. And with that, I have a very exciting announcement. So our annual Road to Revival conference, it will be January 28th from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. at Bush campus. We're going to have a lot of keynote speakers, so be on the lookout for the tickets. They will go live the first 2 weeks of December. And if you buy it early, there is some giveaways. So inshallah, be on the lookout for that. And yeah, with that concludes our program. Thank you all for coming out. And in the back, we do have giant refreshments for everyone. Assalamu alaikum.